Hello, and welcome to Toy and Stitches. If you're a friend, welcome back. If you're new, thank you for stopping by. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about measurements, how to take your measurements and how to use those measurements to create garments for yourself. And from my perspective, once you understand your own measurements, whether you're working from just a video tutorial or you're making something up on your own or you're using an actual pattern, once you understand your own measurements, you can make adjustments to anything or create something that'll fit you the way you want to. So in this video, I'm going to take you through 5 things. So first off, I'm going to touch on my #1 resource for anyone who wants to make garments for themselves. And 2, I'm going to show you how to take a few measurements. I'm going to focus mostly on measurements for when you're working with garments that fit the top half of your body and how those measurements relate to creating a garment for your own body. And 3, we're going to talk about ease, what is ease and how to use it. 4, I'm going to touch on 2 simple ways to construct garments. And then 5, we're going to sit down and I'm going to go through what measurements you would need to create those 2 styles of garments. And I just wanted to say thank you to my friend Anita for requesting this video. And I really hope it helps you, Anita, and someone else out there better understand how to take measurements and how to use those measurements to create garments for themselves. So without further ado, let's jump in.
All right, so the first thing that I want you to do is go to thecraftyarncouncil.com and we're going to download their crochet and knitting standards and guidelines. So you're just going to go to their website, go to standards, scroll down to download standards and guidelines PDF. And this is a very valuable resource for any crocheter and knitter. And I'm just going to quickly go down and highlight the section that I wanted you to look at, which is the section on standard body measurements and sizing, which is page 13 and 14. So it just quickly takes you through what the standard body measurements are, how to figure out sizing, ease, and then it also shows you a list of standard body measurements and how to take those measurements. So this is a really good thing to have. And then if you also print this out, you can just make a note of all your measurements on your little paper right here. So you can always have your measurements right where you need them. So as I said, this is a good resource. I will leave a link down in the description so you can just go down there, click it, and it'll take you right to this so you can download a copy for yourself. So now I'm going to move on to showing you how to take your measurements.
Okay, so right now I'm going to walk you through how to take measurements on yourself. Ideally, it's always better to have someone measure you, but if you don't have someone to help you, I'm going to show you how you would take your measurements. And the measurements I'm going to be showing you how to take today are the ones most often used when you're making, say, tops, cardigans, sweaters, garments that are going to fit on your upper body. And when you're taking your measurements, always be sure to be wearing clothes that fit to the body. You don't want anything loose or baggy. You want to be wearing a well-fitting bra, and you also want to be mindful of your posture. You always want to be standing up straight, because if you hunch yourself over, then you're going to subtract inches off your measurement, so then things might not be completely the way you want them when you're finished. So the first thing we're going to cover is our bust measurement. And when you're measuring your bust, you're going to go around the widest part of your bust, and you're not going to want to pull it too tight. You just want it to be snug. So you wrap it around and you just hold your measurements right where the 0 is. And then one thing you want to also pay attention to is when you want to make sure it's coming right across your back and not sort of hanging down low like this. You want it to come straight across, because if it's hanging down, that's also going to change the actual measurement. So just make sure it's coming straight across your back around the widest part of your bust, and don't pull it tight. Just make sure it sits nice and snug but not tight, and then just mark where the 0 meets the other number, and then just note down that number, and that's your bust measurement. Now your bust measurement is usually what you use to construct the torso tube, which is either a back panel and 2 front panels, a front and a back panel, or say if you're making something that you want to end up with a V, you may have one panel coming this way from back to front and then one on the other side. I'm going to cover those types of garment constructions a little bit later. So yes, the bust measurement is what you would use to construct the section of the garment that your torso is going to fit into. Now we're going to cover arm measurements. So the first one is our armhole depth. So just take your tape measure, get the 0, place it right on top of your shoulder, and then you're going to bring it down right to where your arm opens up, and you're going to note that number. For me, my actual armpit depth is 6 inches, and this will range from about 6 to about 7.5 inches on average for a person, but just measure where your arm opens up, and that's the number you're going to write down for your armhole depth. And you're also going to want to measure the upper part of your arm. So what I like to do is just kind of hold my tape measure like this and slip my arm in, and just where I have the 0, just sort of let it tighten up, spin it around so I can see it, and whatever that number is on my upper arm, for me that's about like 11, just write down the number. So just loop it around your arm and write down that number, and those two numbers combined are going to give you the tube that goes along your arm. So the armhole depth, you just need to know that it's going to fit right into your arm, and you can add inches for ease of wear and your comfort. And then this measurement here is how wide your sleeve is going to be, or how wide your sleeve needs to be at the very least to fit your arm into it. All right, so next we're going to cover our arm length to make sure you know how long you're going to make your sleeves. So normally when you take this measurement, someone is going to measure you from behind, from the center of your back where your spine is, coming down your arm to your wrist. And normally when someone's doing this for you, you would stand up with your arm slightly bent forward to account for the sleeve pulling up when you put your arm down. But when I do this on myself, this is what I do. Grab my tape measure, 0 right in the center of my neck right here. And then I just grab my tape measure and I hold my arm out straight. And then I note the number right at my wrist line. So right here is the number I would record. So just hold that. And this helps if you do it in front of a mirror, write that number down. But then what I will also do is I will add about 2 inches to that number to account for when I put my arm down and the sleeve pulls up, it doesn't become too short. Because when you hold your arm straight out, take that measurement, the moment you put your arm down, the sleeve's gonna pull up and it'll be too short. So when I take my arm length measurement like that, I always add about 2 inches just to account for when I put my arm down. And now we're going to cover what is called like our neck to waist. And this is kind of the baseline measurement for when you're measuring how long you want something to be. Once you have that number, then you can normally just add inches to whether or not you want it to hit your hip, or you want it to be tunic length, anything like that. And again, normally this measurement is done from behind, from the base of your neck to where your natural waistline is. But how I do this in the front on myself, as I did with my arm, I'm gonna put the tape measure right in the center of my neck here, and then I'm going to come down and trace my finger right until I feel the top of my belly button, and I'm going to stop, pinch my measuring tape, and just record that number. So that is your neck to waist length. And then now what you want to do is find your natural waistline, put the tape measure right there where you have the 0, and then bring it down to the widest part of your hip. And whatever that number is there, you're going to write that down, and that is your waist to hip length, because you use those two numbers combined to give you a sense of how long you would want a top or a sweater or a cardigan to be, and then you can add additional inches for it being longer, like mid-thigh and anything like that. But once you have those two numbers, it'll give you a good baseline. And now when you're making tops, generally you don't necessarily need your actual waist or your hip measurement depending on what you're doing, but it's always good to have. So to measure your waist, you're gonna get your tape measure and you're gonna go around your natural waist. And how you find that, that is just right just above your belly button is where your natural waist would sit. So you just grab the tape measure, don't pull it too tight, just make sure it's nice and snug to the body, but not tight. And then that would be your waist measurement. And then for your hip, you're going to grab your tape measure and you're going to go and measure around the widest part of your hip. And just like when we're measuring the bust, you want to make sure the tape isn't sitting on top of your bum or below. It needs to go around the widest part of your hip and your bum, and then just mark that measurement, and that is your hip measurement. So just go ahead, take your measurements, write them down, and then what we will do next is, now that we have our measurements, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to explain to you what ease in a garment is and how that helps you to understand fit when you're making a garment for yourself. So go ahead, take your measurements, and then now we'll go ahead and we'll start talking about ease. All right, what is ease? Ease, simply put, is just the way something's going to fit you, whether it be tight or whether it be loose, going into being extremely loose and oversized. That's all it is. And how you use ease is just to either add inches or subtract inches to get your desired fit. So say you want to have something that is fitted really nice and close to the body, you want it to be nice and figure forming, then what you would do is you would subtract inches from your actual measurement, so that when you're going to put the garment on, you're going to have to stretch it over the body so that it will hug nice and close. And then if you want something that is going to fit, but it's not going to be tight, you would use your actual measurements. You wouldn't add any ease, you wouldn't subtract any inches, add any inches, you would use your exact measurements to then get something that is going to fit to the body, but then not be tight or loose. And then when it comes to things being loose or oversized, it just means you're going to add in inches, whether it be you want something that is just going to sort of skim over the body. So it's going to be a little bit bigger than your actual measurements. So you would add somewhere between 2 and 4 inches. If you want to get into something that is more oversized, you go 6 up to 10 inches. It's all up to you on how you want the thing that you're making to fit. And then another thing you want to keep in mind when you're working with ease is the yarn you're using, because some yarns stretch more than others. So what you don't want to do is be working with a yarn that is going to stretch a lot, and then you add in a lot of ease. So say you add about 6 inches, 10 inches to a sweater that you want to be oversized, but then now you're using a yarn that's going to stretch. Now you're probably going to end up with anywhere from 10, 12, 14 inches of now ease. So now that thing is going to be bigger than you initially wanted it. So it's always good to be mindful and understand the fiber that you're using to make whatever it is you're making, so that when you start to make adjustments using ease, whether it be subtracting inches, adding inches, you're not going to end up with something that doesn't fit the way you want it, because we didn't take into consideration either the stretch or lack thereof in the fiber content of the yarn you're using. So those are just things to keep in mind when you're working with ease. So now that we have an understanding of what ease is, I'm going to just walk you through a couple quick ways of how to construct garments, and then I'm going to show you how to use your measurements to make calculations and put together pieces for yourself. However, so I'm going to be covering just how to make, say, like 2 different styles of cardigans. One is a shrug style like I'm wearing here, and then just a basic style of cardigan where it's just like a back panel, 2 front panel, and some sleeves. So that's what we're going to cover next, and then hopefully all of this information put together will give you the tools necessary to better understand your body and how you can create garments for yourself. So let's move into our next little bit. Before we get to doing calculations and me showing you how to use your measurements to actually map out and construct garments for yourself, I wanted to show you 2 basic types of ways to construct garments. So this one is just a shrug style cardigan, and how it is constructed is by making 2 long rectangular panels, one that is draped over one side of the body and the other one on the other side, and then you seam it halfway up the back to close it together. So I'm going to show you how you would use your measurements to make something sort of in this style. Or we also have here, this is just a basic cardigan, and it is constructed using 2 front panels, 1 back panel, and then the sleeves. So when I'm showing you how to use your measurements to make these, I just wanted you to have a visual of what it would kind of turn out to look like. So this one is just 2 long rectangles, 1 for each side of the body, and then another one where it's 2 panels and a back panel, then you add the sleeves. So just so you can see what it'll turn out to be. So now we're going to sit down and I'm going to show you some basic schematics and how to kind of map out your measurements on those things to create a couple of garments. All right, so we'll move on to that now.
So for our first example, say we're going to be doing something where we're making a shrug style cardigan with 2 rectangular panels that are going to be seamed halfway up and then open in the front. You're going to need pretty much 3 measurements. You're going to need your bust measurement, including whatever ease you will be using. So say for instance, for myself, my bust is 34, and then I want to add in about, say, 6 inches of ease. That would now give me a 40-inch bust measurement. So now what I want to do is divide that number by 4. So if I'm working with a 40-inch bust, now I have to divide that number by 4. Now I'm going to get 10 inches. What does this 10 inches mean? It means the width of the panel needs to be 10 inches. That's it. So this, and normally when you're working in this style, your stitches are going to be worked the long end of the rectangle, and then your rows are going to make up the short side of the rectangle. So you're going to want to work your rows until you get to 10 inches wide, and then you'll have 2 panels, which will make it 20 in the front and 20 in the back for a total of 40 inches. Now you're going to also need your desired length. So you're going to just measure from, say, the top of your shoulder to wherever you want your cardigan to end. And whatever that number is, you're going to double it. So say I would want something that would be about 25 inches long. Now I need to double that number to get 50. And what does this 50 inches mean? It means you're going to now have to chain 50 inches and then work your stitches along that 50-inch chain so that you will have 25 inches that fall to the back and 25 inches that'll fall to the front. And then once you've finished making those 2 panels, you're now going to put them together, seam it halfway up, and then you're going to fold it in half. And now all that would be left to do is for you to sew up the side seams, leaving an opening for your arm. So then you would also need your armhole depth. And you're going to want to add some ease to that measurement, because if you use your exact armhole depth, it's just going to fit around your arm, which for something that is oversized, is not going to be comfortable in comparison to the size of the garment. So usually adding about 1 to 2 inches of ease to your armhole depth would be enough to make it feel comfortable in relation to the rest of the garment. So say, for example, for me, my armhole depth is 6 inches. Now I'm going to want to add, say, about 2 inches. So now that would give me an 8-inch armhole, right? But then no, this number has to now get doubled, because you're going to want 8 inches in the front and 8 inches in the back. So the circumference of the arm opening is 16 inches. So when you fold it in half, you're measuring 8 inches down one side, because then you'll also have that exact same 8 inches on the back half of it. Or if you want to be more precise, you can just find the center line of your 2 panels and then measure 8 inches from each side, and just use a stitch marker to mark it out, just so you have the exact number of rows on either side, just to make sure you have the desired armhole depth that you're looking for. And that would be pretty much what you would need to make something like this. So now I'm going to show you how to use your measurements to make a basic style of cardigan. Now we're going to be looking at what measurements we need if we wanted to construct a basic style of cardigan where you're going to have a back panel, 2 front panels, and 2 sleeves. So first you're going to want to figure out your bust measurement, and you're going to want to include whatever ease you want in that cardigan. So for example, I will use my bust measurement, which is 34. And if I wanted to add in 4 inches of ease, then that would make my total bust measurement that I want the garment to have as 38 inches. So that's my finished bust measurement, 38 inches. So now I would divide that number by 2, which would give me 19 inches. And that 19 inches would now be the width of my back panel. And my 2 front panels need to be just about that size. And I say just about that size because usually when I'm making a cardigan like this, for each front panel, I'm going to make them about 2 inches smaller. So that would subtract about 4 inches off of the front, but remember, we'll be adding in some ribbing and that sort of thing. But what happens when you subtract that 4 inches, I find that as a good measurement, is that it makes it easier for your neck to sit between the 2 front panels. So it's not too tight around the back of your neck. So if I was going to do that, I would take 19 and divide that in half. And then that would give me 9.5. And then from that 9.5, I would subtract 2 inches, which would then give me 7.5. So each of these panels should be 7.5 inches for your front panels. So that's normally how I would do it. So then now you have the width of your front and your 2 back panels. Now for the length, what you can either do is you can just take the tape measure, stick it on top of your shoulder, and then just bring it down to wherever you want your cardigan to end. Or you can use the measurements we were taking earlier from where you measured just from like your neck to your natural waist, and add that measurement to the measurement you took from your natural waist to your hip. Add those 2 together, and that should give you generally a decent length in cardigan. So those are 2 options for when you want to work out the length right there. And normally it kind of varies based on your height and all those things. So the length is usually easier to adjust because then you can just add in or subtract rows. Because usually the width of your panels are going to be your stitches, and then the length of it is going to be your rows, and it's usually easier to adjust the length more than the width. So now that we have our 2 front panels figured out, now we're going to be working on our sleeve. And for your sleeve, you're going to want to know your upper arm circumference, which is that measurement you took around your upper arm, and your armhole depth. And for your armhole depth, you want to add some ease to that exact measurement. So when I took mine, my armhole depth was 6 inches. So then I added in just 1 inch. So now I'm going for an armhole depth of 7, which would make the circumference of my sleeve 14 inches. So what you want to know, what you want to ensure is whatever measurement you're using for your armhole depth, that number doubled should be more than your upper arm circumference, or your sleeve will be too tight. So that's just always something you want to pay attention to when you're working for your sleeve. And now for the length of your sleeve, what you're going to want to do is the measurement we took for your arm from your neck to your wrist, mine is 28 inches. Now what you're going to want to do is subtract half of your back panel from this number. So if my back panel, for example, is going to be 19 inches, and when I divide that in half, I get 9.5. So now I will subtract 9.5 from 28, which will then now give me, I think that's 18.5 inches. So now I know I need to work a sleeve that is 18.5 inches long to get my ideal sleeve length. So that's pretty much how you would work out your sleeve length. You would take your back panel, whatever the width of your back panel, divide it in half, and then subtract it from your neck to wrist arm length measurement, and that should tell you how much sleeve you need to make it the length that you want. And then finally, for when you're working your sleeve, usually when you come to the wrist area, you're going to want to decrease it just so it sits nicely around your wrist. We didn't cover that when I was taking the measurements, but what you would do is just measure around your wrist, put a tape measure around your wrist, and just measure whatever you get. That's how much you need to have here. That circumference here is that measurement you're going to take. So if you make it larger than whatever number you get, the wrist part of your sleeve is going to be a little bit big. And usually for the wrist, we're going to be doing ribbing, and the ribbing does stretch. So you can usually make it slightly smaller than your wrist, just so once you pull it over your wrist, it'll sit nice and snug on your wrist. But that's pretty much how you would use your measurements to, say, piece together a cardigan for yourself or a shrug style garment.
All right, well, that's it for this video. If you found it helpful, please share this video with anyone that you think could use it as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me those in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. And thank you so much for watching. And until next time, take care and bye for now.